I know that I hung on a windy tree 9 long nights, wounded with a spear dedicated to Odin. Myself to myself, aye, there's the clue, Odin hung on that tree of which no man knows from where its roots run. No bread did they give me, nor drink from a horn. Downwards I peered. I took up the runes. Screaming I took them. Then I fell back from there. That was a passage from Runatal, or Odin's rune song, detailing the god's sacrifice of himself to himself. He hangs from Yggdrasil, the world tree, in the hopes that he could gain the knowledge of other worlds and the origin of runes. It's no secret that in his creation of the wider lore of Elden Ring, George R.R. Martin was heavily influenced by Norse mythology. We see this throughout the game in visual motifs and various plot points. The Erd tree bears a striking resemblance to Yggdrasil, with its grandiosity and roots that seem to permeate the lands between. The mountaintop of the giants is reminiscent of Jotunheim, the home of the giants in Norse mythology, and Melania, one of the demigod bosses in the game, looks to have been designed in the image of the Valkyries. But perhaps the most striking comparison of the lore of the game to Norse canon is that of Queen Marika and her similarity to Odin. Whether intentional or not, the information we have regarding the Queen of the Lands Between aligns her, or perhaps more accurately them, with the one-eyed Allfather. This video will explore the similarities between the two. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video below and subscribe if you are so inclined. It really is the best way to support my extremely new channel. I also feel inclined to include a disclaimer that at the time of writing this script, Elden Ring is a relatively new game. Because of this, there is a chance that any pieces of information that are discovered by the community may retroactively disprove information that I give in this video. In the event that this is the case, I apologize ahead of time. Also, spoiler warning, we're going to be talking about some late game and mid game events. Now let's begin. The title of Queen that Marika is afforded is a little misleading. It would be more accurate to describe her as a god, as that is essentially what she is. She was born of the Numen line. We know this from the item description of Marika's hammer, which reads, "Stone hammer made in the lands of the Numen, outside of the lands between." Long-lived and seldom born, we can infer that the Numen are a race of higher beings that migrated into the lands between. There aren't many left. In fact, it is possible that Marika is among the last. There is at least one other character in Elden Ring who logically must have Numen blood, this being her half-brother and shadow-bound beast, Malekith. This is important as it tells us that Marika didn't emerge from a vacuum, as her parentage can be traced. In this way, she, like Odin, should not be viewed as a god above all things in a monotheistic sense, but rather the head of a pantheon. This is further supported by the dubbing of her children as demigods. Marika has 7, possibly 8 children. It's unclear at this point whether their relation to her is reason enough for their demigod title, or if their possession of a shard of the Elden Ring is also a condition. But at the very least, we can extrapolate that Marika was not alone in her godhood. In the same way, Odin is part of a wider pantheon of Norse gods and father to many children. Interestingly, this idea establishes these characters as both incredibly strong, as they rule over the other gods, but also vulnerable, as they're subject to overthrowings. On that subject, we find out while completing Ranni's questline that there is a line of succession for the position of God-Queen over the lands between. The idea of an Empyrean is introduced to the player by Ranni herself, who states,
I was once an Empyrean, of the demigods. Only I, Mikola and Melania could claim that title. Each of us was chosen by our own 2 fingers, as a candidate to succeed Queen Marika. to become the new god of the coming age.
It's widely thought, despite what Rani says, the player character's acting maiden Melina is also an Empyrean, but we'll get to that later on. There are many interesting theories to explore about these potential successors, but on the subject of Odin, one of the most interesting clues lies in the eyes of the Empyreans that we meet throughout the game. One of the most famous stories about Odin is the tale of how he lost an eye. To make a long story short, in his search for the knowledge of things hidden to him, Odin approached his uncle Mimir. After receiving guidance from him, Odin cuts out his own eye from his skull and casts it into the well of Mimir. He then throws himself upon a spear in a kind of ritualistic suicide, and when reborn he lives out the rest of his days with one eye only. The reason this is of interest to us is because of the Empyreans we meet throughout the game, 3 of the 4 of them are missing at least one eye. It's entirely possible that Mikola, the 4th one, is missing an eye as well, but as far as I am aware we never get to see his face. Rani's closed eye seeps blue energy, Melania's is sealed shut by scarlet rot, and Melina's looks to be scarred by some sort of rune. This is an interesting coincidence, if nothing else. However, I do believe that if we read further into this, it could be a vital piece of information that helps us determine what exactly makes an Empyrean worthy of the title. As in the mythology, the loss of an eye represents a larger spiritual journey towards epitomical wisdom. This isn't to say that the loss of an eye is conditioned to rule over the lands between, especially given that Marika doesn't seem to be missing one herself, but it's possible that it represents a knowledge that all or some of these characters share, and that knowledge is the power of runes. Runes are the in-game currency of Elden Ring. We receive them for killing enemies mostly, but we can find them scattered about the lands between. We use them for purchasing items and for leveling up, and I believe that this could be the coveted knowledge that the Empyreans have. Think back to the quote at the start of the video. It's from Odin's rune song, a poem about his journey to find the wisdom that escapes him. In the full chronology, Odin loses his eye, throws himself upon a spear, and then hangs himself from Yggdrasil. By doing this, he learns how to understand the runes. It would be a stretch to say that every Empyrean and every maiden in the story of Elden Ring went through the same process. Perhaps the missing eyes of the heirs to Marika's throne represent a higher understanding of runes and their power. This may be why Melina is able to manifest the player's runes of strength even though she is not a maiden, and indeed how she is able to teach the player to do this themselves later on.
I can play the role of maiden, turning runes into strength to aid you in your search for the Elden Ring. You need only take me with you to the foot of the Erd Tree.
If that suggestion isn't supported enough for you, it is at least interesting to acknowledge that those in the running for the position most closely comparable to Odin in the game are also the ones who are missing an eye, as he did. The latter part of Odin's sacrifice in his hanging from the World Tree is exemplified almost perfectly by Marika herself. When the player first meets Queen Marika, she is hanging from a great rune inside the Erd Tree. The pointed ends of the rune penetrate through her hands, evoking strong biblical imagery of the crucifixion of God incarnate. The name of the boss fight that follows would have us believe that this is Radagon of the Golden Order. However, we know that these two are actually the same person. So given the information that Radagon has bright red hair, and the fact that the boss's hair doesn't change colour until they land on the ground, we can assume that the figure we first see suspended is Marika. The similarity of this scene to the Runatal poem is incredibly striking. Wounded with a spear, dedicated to Odin, myself to myself. Aye, there's the clue, Odin hung, on that tree of which no man knows from where its roots run. The figure we see has been stabbed through the abdomen with the shard of the ring. They hang inside the tree whose roots snake beneath the whole of the lands between, and they dedicate themselves to themselves. Marika and Radagon, 2 and 1, the same and different. Odin hung. And the purpose for which they hang is similar too. Odin to gain the knowledge of runes. Perhaps the most powerful rune in the game is the titular Elden Ring, composed of many shards of runic energy. The ring seems to be a testament to worldly order. It is an accord between many different parts of life, birth, death, power, to name a few. That which commanded the stars, giving life its fullest brilliance. The Elden Ring. The Elden Ring, which Marika shattered, causing a Ragnarok-esque event to befall the lands between. Kin fought kin in a great war that culminated in the scattering of the shards of the Elden Ring. Interestingly, Odin's role in Ragnarok seems to be reflected by Rani, not Marika. Though it's not my speciality, I believe that Odin's primary role was to fight Fenrir the giant wolf. Similarly, Rani's role in the Shattering was to steal the Rune of Death, safeguarded by Malekith, the half-wolf beast clergyman. You could argue that this was actually the cause of the Shattering, as the theft of this rune seems to have been what led to the death of Godfrey. The murder of her first child was what pushed Marika to the brink and caused her to shatter the ring. So whether the fault lies with Marika or Rani is debatable. Either way, there is a clear parallel between the actions of Marika and her associates, and Odin in the context of Ragnarok. With this, I'll begin to wrap up. I hope this video has provided you with some food for thought about the parallels between the two characters we've looked at today, from the one-eye motif to the insights about runes, to their roles in their respective apocalypses. If you enjoyed, please consider subscribing. I have loads of videos I want to make about Elden Ring and other topics. Feel free to suggest videos in the comments and pick me up on anything I got wrong today. Otherwise, thank you for watching and have a great rest of your day.